Never set someone up as a joke on a blind date. What happened next will blow your mind and change how you see love forever. Picture this. You're sitting in an upscale restaurant, thinking you're about to meet someone special. But here's the twist. Your friends didn't set you up with Prince Charming. They set you up as the punchline to their cruel joke. That's exactly what happened to Emma, a 28-year-old teacher who thought she was finally getting her shot at love. Little did she know, she was walking into something that would change her life in ways she never imagined. By the end of this story, you'll understand why sometimes the universe has bigger plans than we do. Emma had been single for 2 years after a messy breakup. Her friends Sarah and Jessica knew she was ready to date again, but they also knew Emma was picky, really picky. So when they told her about this amazing guy they wanted her to meet, Emma was excited but nervous. They described him as successful, charming, and definitely her type. What they didn't tell her was that this whole thing was supposed to be one big joke. The setup was simple. Sarah and Jessica had convinced their friend Mike to go along with their plan. Mike was supposed to show up to the date acting completely ridiculous. They wanted him to be loud, rude, and embarrassing. The goal was to film Emma's reaction and post it online for laughs. They thought it would be hilarious to see her face when she realized what was happening. But here's where things get interesting. Mike never showed up. Emma arrived at Romano's, this beautiful Italian restaurant downtown, wearing her favorite dress. She spent an hour getting ready, doing her makeup just right, picking out the perfect outfit. She was genuinely excited about meeting someone new. She sat at the reserved table, checking her phone every few minutes, wondering where her date was. 20 minutes passed, then 30. She started to feel that familiar sting of rejection creeping in. That's when James walked in. James Morrison, 35 years old, single dad, and CEO of Morrison Tech Solutions. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was actually meeting a business partner for dinner, but the partner had to cancel last minute. James decided to stay anyway because he'd had a long day and just wanted to unwind with a good meal. He noticed Emma sitting alone, constantly checking her phone, looking more disappointed by the minute. Here's where James made a decision that would change everything. Instead of minding his own business, he walked over to Emma's table. He introduced himself and asked if everything was okay. Emma, feeling embarrassed, explained that she'd been stood up. Most people would have offered some sympathy and walked away. James didn't do that. He asked if he could join her. Not as a date, just as someone who didn't want to see her evening completely ruined. Emma hesitated at first, but there was something about James that felt genuine. He had this calm energy about him and his eyes were kind. She said yes. They started talking, and the conversation flowed like they'd known each other for years. James told her about his daughter Sophie, who was 6 years old. He'd been raising her alone since his wife passed away from cancer 3 years earlier. Emma shared her passion for teaching and how she'd always wanted to make a difference in kids' lives. They talked about books, travel dreams, favorite movies, childhood memories. Hours passed without either of them noticing. Meanwhile, Sarah and Jessica were blowing up Emma's phone. They'd realized Mike had bailed on their prank and were trying to figure out damage control. They showed up at the restaurant expecting to find Emma sitting alone, probably crying. Instead, they found her laughing with this incredibly handsome man in an expensive suit. They had no idea who he was, but they could tell Emma was having the time of her life. The friends tried to interrupt, pulling Emma aside to explain what had really happened. They confessed about the setup, about Mike, about the whole cruel joke they'd planned. Emma was devastated, not because she'd been stood up by Mike, but because her own friends had tried to humiliate her for entertainment. She felt betrayed and hurt in a way that cut deeper than any romantic rejection ever could. James overheard the conversation. He saw the pain in Emma's eyes and felt something shift inside him. This woman, who had just discovered her friend's betrayal, who had every right to be angry and upset, was still trying to handle the situation with grace. She wasn't screaming or causing a scene. She was just quietly hurt. And somehow, that made James want to protect her from any more pain. That's when James did something nobody saw coming. He stood up, walked over to where Emma was standing with her friends, and got down on one knee. The entire restaurant went silent. Emma's eyes widened in shock. Sarah and Jessica looked like they'd seen a ghost. James pulled out his phone and started speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. He said Emma's name and told her that in the 2 hours they'd spent talking, he'd learned more about what he wanted in a partner than he had in years of dating. He said she was kind, intelligent, funny, and beautiful inside and out. He told her that his daughter Sophie would love her, and that he wanted to take her on a real date, not as strangers meeting by accident, but as two people who'd found something special. Then came the moment that stopped everyone's heart. James asked Emma to be his girlfriend. Right there, in front of a restaurant full of strangers and the friends who had tried to make her a laughingstock. He didn't have a ring, but he had something better. He had sincerity in his voice and hope in his eyes. The restaurant erupted in applause. People were taking videos, cheering, some were even crying. Emma stood there, tears streaming down her face, not because she was sad, but because for the first time in a long time, someone saw her worth. Someone thought she was valuable enough to make a grand gesture for, not to humiliate her, but to honor her. She said yes. Of course she said yes. How could she not say yes to a man who had turned the worst setup of her life into something magical? Sarah and Jessica stood there watching, realizing that their cruel joke had backfired in the most beautiful way possible. They'd lost a friend because of their meanness, but Emma had found something real. 6 months later, James and Emma were engaged for real. Sophie, James's daughter, was the one who helped him pick out the ring. Emma had become like a mother to her, reading bedtime stories, helping with homework, teaching her how to braid her hair. They'd become a family in the most unexpected way. The story went viral when someone posted the restaurant video online. But it wasn't famous because of the drama or the spectacle. It was famous because it reminded people that kindness still exists. That sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best outcomes. That real love doesn't come from perfect setups or elaborate plans. It comes from two people seeing something worth fighting for in each other. Emma and James got married a year later. Sarah and Jessica weren't invited to the wedding. Emma had learned that people who try to humiliate you for fun don't deserve a place in your happiness. She'd found her person not through dating apps or blind date setups, but through a moment of genuine human connection when she needed it most. The lesson here isn't that every bad date leads to true love. The lesson is that how people treat you in your vulnerable moments tells you everything. You need to know about their character. James saw Emma at her lowest and chose to lift her up. Her friends saw her at her lowest and chose to push her down further. Sometimes the universe has a funny way of putting the right people in the right place at exactly the right time. Emma's story proves that the best things in life often come when we least expect them, and from the places we'd never think to look. Hit that subscribe button to see more incredible love stories that'll restore your faith in humanity.